Hi guys, my name is Dray and welcome back to another episode of True Crime Tuesdays. I know in the past I've been able to say that I'm here for you every single Tuesday, but I have failed you guys. I'm so sorry. I have been away for the last couple of months, essentially dealing with some pretty crazy life changes, but the point is that I'm really sorry that I've been away, but I also did take the time to look after myself and after my mental health. So here I am, I'm back again, and I'm genuinely really excited to be here with you. And I am also going to say that True Crime Tuesday is probably going to change its format a little bit. It's a bit of a storytelling vibe, and yes, I will be including some close family, some close friends in the channel, so stay tuned. I am really excited to see where True Crime Tuesday goes. But back to the intro. I'm not rambling on about my life. True Crime Tuesday is where on Tuesdays I sit down with you guys and we hash out a true crime story together. So stories can range from anywhere between murders, mysteries, disappearances, cults, even survival stories, and more. So if you're a true crime freak like myself, I would highly recommend liking and subscribing to my channel. But if not, I am completely happy that you are here with me today and you are just vibing out, and that's all and more than I can ask for. So without further ado, let's jump into today's story. I am also going to just fully let you know I am halfway between eating lunch and enjoying my tea as well. So if you notice any crumbs, mind your business. Mind your business is all I can say. This story, it is a doozy. It is riveting, it is horrifying, and it's actually a really beautiful story of resilience and strength of a little girl by the name of Mary Vincent, who was 15 years old when this story took place. So this story took place in 1978, where, like I said, Mary was 15. So Mary was one of 7 kids, so obviously grew up in a big family, and she was described to be really happy, really bubbly, really optimistic, and she loved to dance. So dance was something that she wanted to make into a career, and she just loved to do it. Every time she did it, she said that she felt really happy, and Mary said that she was actually really good at dance. And another thing about Mary was that she had always wanted to be a mother. From when she was a little girl, she dreamt about having kids of her own to raise. So this was a dream that she really held on to, that she wanted to see come into fruition. However, one summer, Mary's parents were going through a really messy divorce. So Mary's dad worked as a slot machine repairman, and her mom worked as a casino card dealer. But like I said, they were going through a messy divorce, and this really messed with Mary's mental health. Mary was really upset that her parents were fighting, and I'm not sure if you guys know, but in the field that I work in, we have this abbreviation called ACE. So it stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, which essentially is experiences that sort of alter the architecture of children's brains, and often these events are obviously traumatic, and one of them being parental separation. So just the fear of your parents separating or not even being able to see your parents is obviously an event that can be quite traumatic and quite tough on a child. So Mary wasn't dealing with this very well, and then on top of this, one day Mary came home from school and one of her siblings came up to her and was like, look, dad's on his way home and he's really not happy. And something within Mary told her that she was unsafe and she needed to leave the house. So Mary actually decides to leave the house and run away from home and live on the streets. Like I said, Mary was only 15 at this time, and she decided to leave the comfort of her home with her siblings to be on the streets. Mary later said that she didn't do this to seek good times or, to just go and have fun and do whatever she wanted, but she did this out of the concern of her safety and to save her life. So I didn't really find much information about Mary's parents and the nature of their divorce and if there was any abuse present, but obviously Mary felt so unsafe that she needed to leave. which sort of insinuates that there could be something. I don't know. Anyway, there's not much research about that, so I don't want to say anything conclusive, but that's just what I think. So Mary left her home, and it wasn't the best life on the street. She slept behind unlocked cars, garbage bins, just really unsafe places. And Mary is only 15. She is literally just a little baby, and she's out on the streets by herself. But unfortunately, later on, she meets a boy, and actually not a boy, a man. I think he's in his late 20s or something along those lines. And she becomes friends, or maybe a little bit more, with this guy, and ends up sleeping in cars with him. This man who Mary is dating eventually gets arrested for raping a 15-year-old girl. It wasn't Mary, it was someone else, but this freaked Mary out, and she wanted nothing more than to go back to the safety of familial connection and familial support. But she wasn't ready to actually go back to her parents. So Mary decided that she was actually going to go to her grandfather's house, and he lived in Berkeley, California. Also, if I did mention before, Mary lived in Las Vegas. So like I said, the grandfather lived in Berkeley, California. So Mary was obviously 15 years old. She didn't have a job. She didn't have any money. So how do you think she was planning to get from Las Vegas to California? Any guesses? Any takers? Nope. Hitchhiking. Yes, as you can guess, hitchhiking was the thing of the 70s. When you think about it, back then, everyone was really trusting. It seemed really safe. Everyone was, real vibey, they were there for a vibe. And Mary thought the best way to get from where she was to her grandfather's was hitchhiking. So off Mary went, and the first part of her journey went really well. She managed to catch a ride from where she was down a little bit further down south. So she thought, okay, great. The first leg of my journey was great, so I shouldn't have any issues coming up. Anyway, luckily Mary runs into a group of girls who are also heading exactly where she's heading, down south in California. So she thought, okay, amazing. I have these group of girls, there's safety in numbers, and they all decided to stand on the side of the road, and they held up a sign that said going south as they stood by the side of the road waiting for a car or a van or a truck to take them where they needed to go. Now, it didn't actually take very long for a vehicle to approach. That vehicle was a light blue van, and so let's just say the girls are standing here. The van pulls up and sort of slows down and pulls up ahead of them. So the girls thought, great, there is a car coming, let's go investigate. So Mary was the one who decided that she wanted to go to the van to talk to the owner of the van to see if that owner can take all of them. So Mary runs up ahead to the van to investigate and to talk to the owner of the van. When she approaches the van, the owner rolls down his window, smiles, and says, "Where to?" Now, Mary said that she saw a very, very sweet and friendly old man who actually reminded her of her own grandfather. This old man, asked her where she was going, and she said that she was going down south. And the old man said, okay, that's fine. It's a little out of my way, and I do need to make a quick stop somewhere, but are you still happy for me to take you? And Mary thought, this is awesome. This is great. And she runs back to the group of girls that are waiting back here. Remember, the van is ahead and the girls are back here. So she runs back to the girls and she's like, great, I've just looked in the back seat. There's no one there, so he can probably take you. He's also going down south and is happy to drive us, so let me just get back to him and I'll let you girls know. So the girls are super excited, and Mary runs back to the man in the van. So then Mary says, great, thank you for taking me. I also have a group of friends who are traveling down south. Are you able to take them? And the man says, no, I can't take them. And Mary's thinking to herself, okay, he's got all these empty seats. Why is he not taking them? And they're all going in the same direction, so why is it an issue? Mary is so desperate to get home and to get to family, and she can't wait to see her grandpa. So she decides to run back to the girls and let them know, hey, I'm so sorry. He actually has said that he doesn't want to take you guys. He can only take myself. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to love you and leave you. And the girls sort of looked at each other and they were like, Mary, this is a little dangerous. He is agreeing to take you and you only, and we're all going in the same direction. But Mary was like, yeah, I know it's suspicious, but Mary actually said that, he seems really harmless. He's really sweet. He reminded her of the grandfather. So yeah, she didn't really think much of it, and she took her bags, she said bye to the girls, and she came back into the van with the man. This man was named Lawrence Singleton, and he was 50 years old at the time. So Mary actually asked Lawrence one last time, am I able to actually take the rest of the girls with me? And Lawrence looked sternly at Mary and said, I either take you by yourself or you can wait with the girls. And Mary, like I said, is feeling really homesick and wants to go back to her grandparents. So she's like, okay, no, it's fine. I'll come with you. And she drives off with Lawrence. Mary gets into the van and it all seems to go well. For the first part of the journey, they made small talk, they had chats. He even told her that he had a daughter her age, and Mary thought, okay, that's awesome. Like, he's obviously helping a girl in need that reminds her of his daughter, and it seems like everything was going well. So remember how Lawrence told Mary that he needed to make a quick stop somewhere? Lawrence pulls up and tells Mary, actually, I need to stop by my house. And Mary said, that's fine, that's okay. So they pull over to his house. Mary stays in the vehicle while Lawrence goes back to his house, I suppose to grab a few items. But Mary said that she felt relaxed and there wasn't really anything suspicious and he wasn't doing anything shady. So he thought, okay, this is awesome. Sorry. Gosh, I love tea so much. Anyway, so Lawrence returns from the house and they get in the car. And Lawrence and Mary start driving again. And Mary is thinking to herself at this point, okay, this is awesome, because if he was going to hurt me or if he was going to attack me, he probably would have done it in the comfort and safety and privacy of his house. She actually asked Lawrence, like, hey, am I able to just sort of kick back and smoke? And Lawrence is like, yeah, of course, by all means. So Mary pulls out a cigarette and she starts lighting it, and she's taking a couple of puffs, and then she accidentally sneezes. Now, sneezing is a normal bodily function that everyone does. Now, Lawrence, for some reason, is so triggered by Mary's sneeze that he grabs Mary and pulls her closer to him and says, let's see if you're really sick. Which is so weird, so creepy. I don't even know how I would react in that situation. When someone does something so bizarre that you just sort of freeze up and you're like, it takes a moment for your brain to process what actually happened. But anyway, Mary was in shock. She was like, what the hell just happened? And Lawrence just went back to normal and began to drive again. And Mary thought that this was so strange. But Mary decided to give Lawrence the benefit of the doubt because everything had been going so well until that weird sneeze interaction. So she's like, it's okay, maybe it's a one-off weird incidents. Eventually though, she starts to feel really, really tired, and she says to Lawrence, hey, it's gonna be a really long drive. Is it okay if I just doze off for a little while? And Lawrence is like all for this. He's like, yes, go ahead, have a nap, it's fine. You can sleep for as long as you like and I'll be fine. You don't have to worry about me, just go to sleep. So Mary's like, okay, sweet. It is going to be a long journey and ride ahead. They were going from Las Vegas to California. So she decides to doze off. And when Mary wakes up, she is panicked. She slowly looks around and she realizes that number one, it is super dark outside. And number two, they are nowhere near where he said he would drop her off. And Mary starts freaking out. This is everything that her friends warned her against. And she starts to feel around in the car, in the seat of the car, for anything that she can use to sort of threaten him or to, tell him that he needs to turn the car around. She found sort of a sharp object. I don't really know what that object was, near her car seat, and she managed to get it out, and she turned to Lawrence and says, take me where I need to go right now. And Lawrence is so shocked by this, and he's like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I just started dissociating when I was driving. I didn't even realize that I was here. Let me turn the car around right now. And Lawrence actually did do what he said. He said he would turn the car around, and he did. Now, Mary is feeling super uncomfortable. She's had that weird sneeze incident with him where he freaked out at her, and now he drove in a different direction when she was asleep. So it's not looking good for Mary, and Mary can feel it within every fiber of her being. So they keep driving, and Mary is super conscious at this point. Now, Lawrence said that he really needed to pee. And Mary was like, oh my gosh. But Lawrence wanted to pull off to a secluded area to obviously have the privacy to pee. And Mary was like, okay, that's fine. So they pull off, and he drives to an even more secluded spot. And Mary is freaking out. So Lawrence gets out of the car and he goes around the back, and Mary gets out of the car as well. And Mary is thinking to herself, okay, I need to run. So she looks down, and before she can run, she realizes that one of her shoelaces are untied. So moral of the story, guys, tie your shoelaces constantly and all the time. Anyway, Mary bends down to tie over his shoes, and she's thinking, I just need to run away from this man. As Mary is tying her shoelaces, she feels a pressure in the back of her head, and everything goes black. Turns out that Lawrence actually crept up behind Mary when she was tying her shoelace and actually hit her in the back of her head with all the strength in his body, which obviously knocked Mary right out. Mary said that it felt like a sledgehammer, but I did want to note that there was a discrepancy because in the court documents, it actually mentions that Lawrence had hit her with his fist. I don't really know why that discrepancy was there, but I just thought it was an interesting thing to mention. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Lawrence Singleton. So Lawrence Larry Singleton, so Larry was his nickname, but he's disgusting and he doesn't deserve a nickname, so I'm just gonna call him Lawrence. So Lawrence was 50 years old at this time, and he was one of 9 siblings. He also came from a massive family. So his dad was, I believe, 40 when he was born, and his mom was 21. So they had pretty big age gap. His siblings did mention that there was nothing about his upbringing that could have sort of messed him up in the head. He had a really happy childhood. Everything seemed normal, and there was literally no shred of abuse that was happening from what the siblings were saying about Lawrence. Lawrence was known to be a very angry man, a really bad temper. He did work in the military at one stage, and he also worked as a sea merchant. And this is really interesting, and I'll bring that up later. I actually have no idea how this man was married. Not even once, he was married twice. And to one of those wives, he had a 15-year-old daughter. Well, obviously not a 15-year-old daughter. He had a daughter that grew up to be the same age as Mary, is what I'm trying to say. And yeah, so essentially the daughter hated Lawrence so much. Lawrence would try to enforce these really strict disciplinary tactics. Essentially, all you need to know is that Lawrence's daughter hated him, and it even got to a point where I think he had physically assaulted her at one stage. I couldn't find heaps of information about what that altercation was. All I know is that she was scared of Lawrence and just did not like him or respect him as a father. So anyway, back to the story. Mary was unconscious. She had obviously been hit in the head with fist or a sledgehammer. Now, when she regains consciousness, Mary said that Lawrence had actually shoved his penis into her mouth and demanded for her to give him oral sex, which was absolutely disgusting, and Mary was terrified. Lawrence then throws Mary in the back of the van and tells her that if she wanted to survive, that she essentially had to do everything he said. Lawrence began to tie Mary up in these really tight knots, and she's obviously in the back of the van. He gets around to the front and starts driving to another secluded spot. Now Mary is horrified, and she cannot believe that Lawrence switched up so quickly. When he arrived at this secluded spot, he cut the ties on her hands free, and he forced her to drink an unknown substance from this plastic container. It turns out that later on he verified that it was alcohol, and essentially forced her to drink until she passed out. And when she passed out, Lawrence had continued to rape her and sexually assault her throughout the night. Now, at some stage when Mary gained consciousness, she was obviously tied and her hands and feet were bound. She tried so desperately to try to get out of these restraints, but because the knots were tied so well and so tightly, it was impossible for her to get out of those knots. And as you can probably guess, Lauren's experiences with working as a sea merchant probably disgustingly came in handy to tie Mary up and keep her in those restraints. When Mary gained consciousness, it was during the morning. So essentially that attack had happened throughout the entire night. So Lawrence orders Mary to get out of the van and to lie on the side of the road. But for some reason, Mary just had this gut feeling and something within her that told her that he wasn't going to set her free. She started to plead with him and beg him to save her and to just let it go and that she wouldn't tell anyone and this would all be over. She specifically tells Lawrence that she wants to be set free. Lawrence goes back to the van and he actually starts to advance to Mary, who is laying on the side of the road with a hatchet. As Lawrence advances towards Mary, he lifts his hand up, the one with the hatchet, to try and swing down, but Mary actually grabs onto one of his arms with her left hand, but she can feel herself suddenly falling back. Mary was really confused as to why she was falling back, because she did hold on to Lawrence's arms, but she felt her body coming back, so she was really confused. It wasn't until Mary hit the ground that she realized that one of her arms, her left arm specifically, had been severed from the elbow. Mary is horrified, but she has no time to process what has actually happened because he starts trying to hack off her other arm. So Mary actually grabs on to Lawrence and she is fighting, she is kicking, she is screaming, and he says to her, "If you want to be free, I'll set you free." And he actually proceeds to chop off her other right arm. I want you guys to think about how strong Lawrence had to be to first of all chop off her first left arm with one blow, and then it only took him 3 times to sever the other arm with a hatchet. How mind-blowingly crazy is that? And horrifying for Mary. As Mary laid on the ground without her 2 arms, her body completely naked, she notices that Lawrence, out of the corner of her eye, is just shaking his arm violently. He's just sort of doing that. And for a second, Mary was like, why the hell is he doing that? And when she actually took a closer look, she saw her left arm, the one that was originally holding onto Lawrence's arm, and it was tightly gripped around one of his arms. So the reason why he was violently shaking his hands was because her arm was actually still latched on, like the nerves were still active and holding onto his arm. He actually had to shake his hand for a while for the hand to be released. How crazy is that? I just cannot believe that. Yeah, it just seems like, I don't know, it just seems like something out of a horror movie. It doesn't seem like it happened in real life, but Mary said it definitely happened, which was, I don't know, just mind-blowing to me. Mary knows that Lawrence is an absolute monster with no empathy, no ability to reason, and she thinks that the best thing she can do to guarantee her survival is playing dead. Mary then feels Lawrence dragging her body, and she was pretending to play dead at this point, remember? So she feels him dragging her body through the woods and finally off a 30-meter cliff. So not only had Lawrence tortured her, he just threw her off the cliff. And so Mary, who was playing dead at this point, obviously had to make sure that she didn't make a sound. And during her fall, she broke 4 ribs. I could not imagine how Mary felt in this moment of time. She had had both her arms severed. She'd been sexually assaulted and raped throughout the night before. She has been thrown off this cliff, and now this monster was coming down this cliff to make sure that she wasn't alive. So Mary had to essentially play dead, make sure that she wasn't crying, that she wasn't making a sound. Like, how strong is this 15-year-old girl? So Lawrence then climbed down to where Mary was and actually made sure that she was dead. And when he was convinced that she was, Lawrence then dragged her body into a cement pipe. And Mary said that she could remember really clearly what he said to her before he left. And he said, "Okay, now you're free." So Mary can hear Lauren's footsteps walking away, but Mary was terrified to get up at this point. She thought that if she moved or made a single sound, that Lawrence would come back to finish the job. So Mary waited for a few minutes, but Mary was in a dire state. She had lost so much blood from her arms being severed. She had obviously broken 4 ribs and she was in so much pain. She was in and out of consciousness, but she had very, very little energy in her body left to fight. Mary said that everything in her wanted to just go to sleep and rest and never deal with this again, and she essentially wanted to die. She wanted so badly to pass out, but there was a voice in her head. When I heard this for the first time, I felt goosebumps. Mary had heard a voice in her head tell her that if she didn't get up, that this man was going to do this to someone else. And Mary said that this was the last thing she ever wanted. She didn't want for anyone else to go through what she did. How incredibly brave and courageous is that? The fact that she was able to get up and fight, not because of her own desire and own will to live, but because she didn't want this pain inflicted on anyone else. This is when her survival mode just went from 0 to 100. Mary was already incredible in the fight that she put up before, but yeah, this part of the story is absolutely amazing. So Mary actually sits up. She thought to herself, okay, I need to stop the bleeding from happening so much. And she begins to pack some of her wounds with the mud around her. She then musters all the strength in her body to get up and to start walking. And amazingly, she makes her way up this 30-foot cliff and she starts walking up. And obviously, it took her a really, really long time to get up because she was walking with her hands up, essentially because she didn't want to lose any more blood. And by a long time, I mean that she was dumped in the cement pipe around the morning, but when she got up that cliff, it was nightfall. She had no hands, she was bleeding, she was horrified, she was in the dark, and now her next challenge was to find someone to actually get her help. It didn't actually take long to notice that there was a car approaching her, so she thought, okay, this is amazing, I'm gonna get rescued. But the car that had 2 young men in it saw the state that Mary was in, and they were horrified and they drove right off. So Mary said that when she saw this, she had lost all hope. She thought, okay, I've made it all the way up this cliff. I've been through all that pain, all that trauma, and no one is going to stop for me, and I'm probably going to die. But luckily, a couple on the honeymoon who actually happened to take the wrong turn and ended up where Mary was, decided to help her. So they pull over, they take her in, they wrap her arms with towels to stop the bleeding, and they drove her off to the airport where she was lifted to the hospital. When she was in hospital, she was treated for her injuries. So she had obviously 4 broken ribs from the fall, and she had lost half the amount of blood in her body, which is an insane amount of blood to lose. The fact that Mary climbed up a 9-meter cliff with 2 of her arms chopped off and 4 broken ribs, the strength of that girl is insane. She was also later fitted for prosthetic arms, and immediately she wanted to work on catching this guy. She provided law enforcement with such a detailed image of who her attacker was that it didn't take very long for a neighbor of Lawrence to actually identify him and tell the police about him. So police actually find out that Lawrence had 2 properties. So they go to the first property and they find Mary's cigarette butts as well as some of Mary's clothing. So obviously Lawrence had tried to burn some of Mary's clothes, but bit of a dummy and didn't actually manage to do that very well. So yeah, that was the evidence that they had from that house. The other house in Nevada actually held the blue van, which matched Mary's description, but the inside of his van was completely stripped. A neighbor of Lawrence actually came forward and said that Lawrence had asked him to help him strip his entire van, but he wasn't really suspicious because Lawrence was, an older man and they didn't really think much of it. So they just did it anyway. But I'm thinking, okay, isn't it suspicious if your neighbor asks you to strip their van? Wouldn't you think that that's sort of weird? I don't know. But essentially, Lawrence actually gets apprehended, but Lawrence actually claims that Mary was a sex worker and he insisted that he didn't actually commit any crimes. He also maintained the story that he was in the car with two other men by the name of Pedro and Larry, which, if you remember, is his own nickname. So he's so dumb that even when he thought about a story, he couldn't even think of a fake name for someone else in the car. But anyway, according to Lawrence, Larry and Pedro were in the car. They paid Mary to have sex with them, and then at some point he passed out from drinking alcohol, and then Larry was the one that was driving the van and told him that Mary had left, which is a little bit suspicious, but that was Lawrence's initial story. He also did refer to Mary as a $10 a night whore, which is vile and disgusting because he is the real problem in this case. But anyway, this is the story that he maintained. And then once again, Lawrence's story changes and he says that Mary was the one who actually threatened him. According to Lawrence, Mary said to him that if he didn't drive her down to California, that he was going to accuse him of rape. But I don't know, he was a little small brain man. I don't know how else to describe him, but that was the story that he was sticking to. So obviously when the case went to court, Mary testified against him, which was really, really brave of her to do. So Lawrence also claimed that he had no recollection of how Mary's arms were severed and how they were chopped off. He said that he got blackout drunk and then just passed out, which is also not an excuse. Like, if you passed out from drinking that much alcohol and someone that was with you ends up with their arms chopped off, you have a certain degree of responsibility, especially when that person is a 15-year-old child and you have a 15-year-old child. Is that not messed up? But anyway, Lawrence essentially gets his ass beat in court, and he's convicted of kidnapping, first-degree rape, and he was given the maximum sentence of his crime at that time, which was only 14 years. Unfortunately, the laws at that time only permitted for Lawrence to be kept away for 14 years. So Mary sighed in relief as she heard that Lawrence was going to be locked away for 14 years. I mean, yes, 14 years isn't the longest time, but it just meant that he was going away and he wasn't going to be able to hurt her or hunt her down or, sort of finish the job. But as Mary sighed in relief, she quickly realized that she actually had to walk by Lawrence one more time before she exited the courtroom. And as she did, Lawrence actually leaned in and said to her, "I'm going to finish the job if it takes the rest of my life." This left Mary so traumatized. So Mary was actually gunning for legal compensation, for victims' compensation for what happened to her. So she managed to hire a legal team and they went after Lawrence. Now, they were suing Lawrence for $2.5 million in damage, and Lawrence actually said that he wasn't able to show up to court because he was worried that he was going to be shot. And the reason why he was invited to court, not invited like a party, the reason why he was asked to present himself in court was because they were trying to judge to see if he was able to, pay the $2.5 million. But obviously he wasn't able to pay it. So essentially Mary only got $13,000 out of the $2.5 million that she actually won off the case. But in a lot of cases, it's not very common that the victim actually gets the full amount of money. It's a little bit more of mental thing to know that you have won against this perpetrator, but then again, he was only behind bars for 14 years. When Mary returned to her home life, she felt really isolated, really alone, and she felt like no one really understood her. Her parents were there, but they really weren't the support that she needed. Mary said that her parents were more concerned with how they felt about what happened to Mary as opposed to how Mary actually felt and how she was dealing with the recovery process following such a traumatic event. Mary actually had to go to a specialized school, a school that helped to support children with disabilities, and she said that she felt really, really isolated at the school. So as soon as she graduated, she decided to move away and she led a really secretive and quiet life. The impact of what Lawrence had done to her and what he had said to her in court had left her so traumatized. She was depressed. She eventually even developed an eating disorder. She had trouble leaving the house, and she saw many of the relationships in her life sort of just crumble and eventually fade away. Mary said that she felt suicidal, and a few times she wanted to take her own life, but she could never bring herself to do it. Mary had had her arms taken away by this monster, and because of that and because of her injuries, she wasn't able to dance like she did. She was incredibly depressed because that was her one true passion in life, and she felt like her entire childhood was just taken from her. But unfortunately, after only serving 8 years and 4 months in prison, Lawrence Singleton is let out from San Quentin prison, where he served his sentence for being a model prisoner. Yep. Again, I feel like every true crime story, there's always a case where either the police department or the prison justice department just lets victims down over and over again. Like, you can never go a case without that happening. I thought that it was really interesting that one of the psychologists in prison that was working with Lawrence actually said that he was not ready to go out to society because he'd be a danger to himself and to other people, because he was so angry and he was so hostile and he had all these really like negative emotions in him. So even the psych told them that he wasn't ready. Like, how does a psychologist vouch for a prisoner to stay because they're not ready to be in society? And I don't know, I just feel like they should have listened to what the psychologist said. But anyway, he gets let out and communities are enraged. They cannot believe that Lawrence is out and he was not accepted to live in many communities. Towns in California simply refuse to have him live in their borders. So because of this, Singleton actually lived on a trailer-ish area or trailer park, something along those lines, of the San Quentin grounds, where he was given a parole officer. He said that during this time he attended AA meetings because he had issues with his alcohol and his temper. So that was happening. And all this while, Mary was horrified and she actually went into hiding. Lawrence had the goal of re-triggering Mary once again by actually suing Mary back. So Lawrence claimed that he was actually the victim in all of this. And because Mary got aggressive with him when she asked him to turn around, it provoked him to be angry towards her and in turn be super violent and all of that. So that was his claim. So Lawrence was claiming that he was throwing up just thinking about it. He couldn't get any sleep. And the case essentially got laughed out of court because no one was believing what this tiny little man was saying. Well, I don't know. He wasn't tiny. I'm pretty sure he was pretty tall and he towered over Mary. But he just gives small man energy. Like, just very small brain, just... Anyway, you get what I'm saying. While Lawrence is being an absolute weirdo and just making a fool out of himself, Mary is traumatized and she is in hiding. She cannot believe that this is all happening again. She has been re-triggered. She said that she started to have these nightmares, and these nightmares were so violent that she ended up dislocating shoulders. She was waking up in sweats. She could not go to sleep. She was really being re-triggered by the release of this man that tortured her. She began to hire bodyguards. She could barely leave the house. She couldn't stay in one place for too long, and it was all just coming back to her again. And she felt like there was nothing that she could do. And the restraining order wasn't really going to do much. All it was really actually going to do was show Lawrence where Mary was and then order him not to go near her, which sort of defeats the purpose of living a very secretive life in isolation. But yeah, so Mary felt really stuck. And when you think about it, do you think that someone who sexually assaults and rapes a 15-year-old girl, chops her arms off and throws her off a 30-foot cliff would actually follow a restraining order? I don't think so. I don't think so. But anyway, because California wasn't exactly welcoming Lawrence back to their communities, Lawrence actually decides that he's going to move back to Florida, where he's originally from. So when he moved back in 1990, he was actually arrested for petty theft, and he was supposed to serve 2 years in prison, but he ended up only serving 60 days. About 20 years later, after Lawrence had attacked Mary, Mary's worst nightmare came true. And on February 19, 1997, a 9 911 call came by from a house painter, and a painter said that he saw a nude man covered in blood stabbing a nude woman. And he said in that call that he heard the sound of bone cracking. Can you imagine how violent that he would have to be to stab someone and then you can hear the sound of bone cracking? Like, that's insane. Lawrence actually lured a sex worker by the name of Roxanne Hayes to his house and unfortunately killed her. So apparently after the 911 call was made, a unit was dispatched, and when the police actually arrived at the door, and his dumb ass decided to not even try to hide it. So he was covered in blood and he was naked. He did once again love to play his favorite card, so he played the self-defense card, and he said that Roxanne was the one who was actually violent and he acted in self-defense. But then again, I don't think the sound of bone cracking is really self-defense. Yeah, but anyway, that was Lawrence's side of the story. But obviously, again, his story was laughed out of court, and obviously he was convicted for murder. When Mary found out that there was going to be a trial, Mary was so brave to come from where she was to Florida to testify against him. And because her testimony was given in such great detail, she was a huge part as to why Lawrence was held accountable and essentially sentenced to death. However, on the 28th of December 2001, when Lawrence was 74, he died in prison from cancer. But because of Mary's case, this led to the second passing of the No Second Chances for Murderers, Rapists, or Child Molesters Act of 1998. It's a pretty self-explanatory law, but essentially it seizes the early release of people who use torture in their crime, as well as people who rape and sexually assault children, which is a great law. And it's so sad that all of this had happened to Mary for it to actually be set in place. However, I was so amazed when I heard about how incredibly strong and resilient Mary was in all of this. Even when she was talking about how she was in that cement pipe and all she could think of was essentially that she needed to get up, not necessarily for herself and her will to live, but because she knew that if she didn't get up, he probably would have done it to so many other victims. If you're wondering where Mary is, she is doing really, really great for herself. Since Lawrence's death, she's been able to actually have that closure and feel safe and feel like he's not going to come out of prison, not going to hurt her. And Mary was essentially able to move on. Mary eventually got married. She had 2 sons and she lived with a bunch of pets. I'm pretty sure she even had a parrot at one point. So it was, things were looking up for her. She also mentioned that one skill that she picked up that she actually didn't have before was an ability to do art. So Mary actually became an artist and she began to work with chalks and pastels to be able to draw family portraits. So people would send in photographs and she would actually draw them, which is insane because before the attack, Mary said that she could never even draw a straight line, even with a ruler. To possess this ability after the attack was absolutely incredible, and she's got prosthetic arms as well, so that's amazing in my opinion. Mary also became a leading advocate for victims, and she said that she could have never have transitioned from being a victim to being a survivor if she didn't have those advocates around in her life. And she's become an advocate for victims who have had such horrible things happen to them. She continues to tell her stories to raise awareness about what has happened. She said at one stage when she was young, she felt like she was 10 feet tall and nothing could hurt her. But Mary, when she tells the story, she's always preaching for people to be aware of the surroundings. And she said that although she's moved on, she's never been able to forget what has happened to her and the trauma that has followed her since that event. But I think she is an absolutely incredibly strong woman. It was so empowering to hear the story and to just see the strength of a woman. And she was only 15 when she had to really fight for her life, and it was absolutely incredible. And when I heard the story, I knew I really wanted to share it with you guys. So thank you for being here and listening to my story. I am so happy and excited to be back. But that's all for this week essentially, so I will see you next time on True Crime Tuesday. Until then, please stay safe. I love you guys. Bye.